Warren, give us a sense, have you got a feel of the enormity of the economic impact of all this right now?
Yeah, good morning, Kieran. I think the enormity of the situation has really become apparent this week. There's essentially two shocks to the economy. One, immediate shock that this pandemic represents, and then there's sort of how do we get the economy going later. In terms of this immediate shock, it is rapidly becoming an employment problem. The Treasury last week estimated as part of the second package that about 1 million jobs would be lost. That was announced last Sunday. That was over 6 months. Well, it looks like we're going to get through that in very short order. I think for your viewers, I'll just give you a couple of numbers here in terms of the magnitudes of this. In the food service industry, there are 837,000 people employed as at February. Now, that's 6.5% of the workforce. Water, air, transport, support services, 150,000. Arts, sports, recreation, 270,000. These directly impacted industries, with the biggest one, retail trade, 1.3 million people. We're hearing stories of firms shedding and standing down between 60 and 90% of their staff. So I think very quickly we can talk about over 1 million jobs being lost. And if you look at other exposed industries, there's another, on my assessment, 3 million people employed in industries that are quite heavily exposed. So I think by the time we get to Easter, we're going to probably see about 1.5 to 1.8 million job losses here in this economy due to stand downs. And that will take the unemployment rate, which is, as of February, 5.1%, probably above 15% to somewhere between 15 and 17%. So that's that shock that's hit the economy right now. That will start to ease as the social distancing restrictions are eased over the course of the year. And I think unemployment will come down to, say, 8 to 10%, something like that, and that's very much a guesstimate at this stage. But then the question is, what next? How can we get the economy going? And that's really a critical part of government policy right now, is what do we do to make sure that once we're through this health crisis, we're getting the economy moving?
So given those numbers you talk about, the question many are asking, is this another Great Depression?
I don't think it is. I don't think it is. The Great Depression was a significant economic shock. In fact, you could argue this is an even more diabolical economic shock than what we saw in the Great Depression. But the Great Depression really was a recession that became severe because of failed government policy. And really, modern macroeconomics has learnt from that, and it was really born out of the Great Depression with things like Keynes's general theory. So I don't think we're going to get a Great Depression because we've learnt from those mistakes. But it does mean government policy is critical at this stage. Government policy to support people to keep up basic incomes and to try and minimise business closures. That's the key in this next 6 months.
And what do you think about the government's policy response? Some noises over the last few days that they might indeed go to a direct wage subsidy. Should they?
Look, the government's said from the start they were going to use existing programs. This has been a very fast-moving problem from an economic perspective, and I think now the severity of it suggests that we need to move to a wage subsidy approach. I think the magnitude of the job losses means we've got to really try and keep as many people on the payroll as possible to keep them connected to employers, to allow the economy to, as quickly as possible, start to grow again towards the end of the year. So I think a wage subsidy is critical at this juncture. The government needs to pivot. I think they will pivot because we've had such a significant amount of job losses evident in the last week. Yeah. And I think overall their strategy so far has been quite significant. I mean, they talk about 10% of GDP fiscal stimulus. I think their direct spending's been about $70 billion out of that 189 they reference. I think there's a lot of scope to do more government spending.